Thank you very much, James. Now I'd like to introduce Paul, the Deputy Leader of the party, Nigel's right-hand man, as they say. The cherry on our cake this evening. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you ever so much for introducing me in such a kind manner. I've never been introduced as the cherry on anyone's cake before, but I'm happy to be so tonight. And thank you for coming. You know, a beautiful evening, beautiful Friday evening in a beautiful city. Worcester must be one of the most beautiful cities in the country. It really reminds me, or epitomises what England, I suppose, should be about. I want to start by saying what a pair of excellent speakers we've already had this evening, and one of the things that I'm noticing is the quality of candidates that UKIP has out there in this election this year. I had a choice at the beginning of the year whether I would sit in London and do the Daily Politics and the other shows on a regular basis, or the other option was to go out and meet people around the country and speak at public events like this. And I chose the latter because what I really wanted to do was to get out there and really understand how the party has grown, how the party has progressed, and really gauge just really where we are in terms of progression. And I must say, this party is incomparable to what it was even back in 2010, when we got 3% in the general election. You will hear the scaremongers out there and the mainstream media who are talking about UKIP going down in the polls. Well, there were 3 polls yesterday. One had us on 15%, one had us on 16%, and one had us on 19%. And indeed, if you look at where we've come in the polls since the end of March, we've actually gone up. So I don't know where they're getting this from. Of course, it's the Conservative papers with their agenda, and the Labour papers with their agenda. And they have to have this agenda because they are afraid of what UKIP is and what UKIP says. They are afraid because UKIP is connecting with normal people out on the streets. Working class people, middle class people, people in the north, people in the south, people who once voted Conservative, people who once voted Labour. We are transcending class barriers in many ways, because we are speaking simple, common sense. We're speaking the language that people have been looking for many, many years. We straight talk, we say what we mean what we say. And the political class, the politically correct establishment, they fear that because they know we are connecting. You take, for example, where we stand on the issue of immigration, which in many people's eyes is the top topic in this general election. And what we're saying is simple common sense. We don't believe that it makes any sense whatsoever to allow a city the size of Hull to come into your country net, which is what happened last year. It makes no sense to do that when you have around 850,000 of your own young people between 18 and 24 unemployed. It makes no sense when there are 2 million people in this country who cannot get a job. And all we want to do is to have a system like Australia, like Canada, where we have the right to choose not just the quantity of people that come into the country, but the quality as well. And it isn't racist, ladies and gentlemen, and it isn't xenophobic to say, if you've got the skills that this country needs, yes, please come here and work. But we will never allow people to take out of the system without ever putting in first. It is simple, common sense. I must say, I'm mightily impressed with the way the party has progressed here in the West Midlands. And you said before that you now have a full slate of candidates. This is the way to go, because local elections are the Trojan horse to Westminster. You must show people in your local community that you can be trusted with their votes. You must do well and prove yourself in council chambers. And I am happy to say that this is happening now within UKIP, because UKIP councillors up and down the land have the highest attendance record in council chambers than any of the other political parties. And we have the local policies to boot. We do not have a whip system for councillors. So if you elect a UKIP councillor, that person will always put the community above party. Indeed, we want to see devolution, real devolution, power devolved, I mean, not more to the nations, but I mean to local communities. I don't want to talk about city mayors, combined authorities. What we want to see is real power devolved, not to more politicians, but to people. And we will do this by ensuring that there is direct democracy within communities, whereby if 5% of people sign a petition within a borough area, you will trigger a local referendum, whether it be on that wind turbine or that wind farm built on the hill above the town, whether it is on a new Tesco being built in the community, whether it is a new housing estate. If the local people reject this idea, it should be thrown out altogether. We believe in power to people. And didn't we do well in the European elections last year? Nationally, we got 24 MEPs elected. We became the largest party in the European Parliament. You got 3 MEPs elected here in the West Midlands who are working hard on your behalf. What I like to say when I talk about last year's European elections is that we created political history because we became the first party since 1906 to win a national election outright in this country that wasn't the Labour Party or the Conservatives. We have already created political history. And now if you look at where we are in the polls, we're on the cusp of doing something special in this election too. Now I want to talk briefly about a number of issues which will come up in this election. I've already spoken about immigration. I think the next big issue on people's lips is indeed the NHS, because Labour have made it such a big issue in this election. And they've lied about UKIP time and time again on leaflet after leaflet, sponsored primarily by trade unions like Unite and organisations like Hope Not Hate and Unite Against Fascism. They have put out leaflets claiming that UKIP want to privatise the NHS, want an American system, want to charge people to see their GPs. Nothing could be further from the truth. Let me lay this one out right now. The only people I've ever heard talking about charging people to go and see their GPs are 2 Labour lords, Lord Warner and Lord Winston. And indeed, if the Labour Party want to talk about privatisation of the NHS, well, they privatised 4.5% of it between 1997 and 2010. And all this from the party of PFI. PFI contracts which have saddled the National Health Service with a debt of £300 billion. So now every £10 that's spent in the NHS, a pound is going on covering the debt which they racked up through PFI contracts. I mean, how dare they? And what we're saying in UKIP is we want to keep the NHS free at the point of delivery, totally in public hands, and funded completely out of general taxation. And ladies and gentlemen, we are now committing ourselves to putting an extra £3 billion every single year into the NHS for this Parliament, which is way above and beyond anything the other political parties are offering. And they say, where will you find this money? You're making promises without costing things. Well, we are the only political party in this election that has a fully costed programme of where we're going in the next 5 years. And we believe we can make cuts to non-essential budgets which will bring in at least £27 billion over the next, well, per annum. Where would we do this? Well, firstly, we would look at the foreign aid budget. A foreign aid budget which is costing this country, at the moment, £12 billion a year, soon to rise even further. And we would like to see this budget cut by £10 billion. We will give £2 billion a year in foreign aid. Now people say, those on the left in particular, that this is somehow unethical. Well, put it this way, even if we cut it by £10 billion, we would still be spending more than Italy and Spain put together on foreign aid. And to put this into perspective, it works out at the moment at £32 million every single day that we're spending in foreign aid. And where's that money going? Well, we'd like to see it go to countries where there's been an Ebola crisis or where there are starving children. Obviously with the proviso that it gets through to the people who really need it, those starving children, and doesn't feather the pockets or stuff the pockets of unethical, cruel dictators. But ladies and gentlemen, we're still giving foreign aid to countries like China, to countries like Argentina, which have just bought a load of jets off the Russians. We're still giving foreign aid to Brazil. We're still giving foreign aid to India with its space program, its nuclear weapons, its aircraft carriers, more millionaires and billionaires than ourselves. And India, which has already told us it doesn't need or want our foreign aid, yet we continue to give it. Ladies and gentlemen, there were 1 million people in this country last year who had to go to food banks. And what we're saying in UKIP is, again, simple common sense. What we're saying is charity begins here at home. And we would find that £3 billion out of the foreign aid budget, but equally, we would save another £2 billion from the NHS. And how would we do it? What we would do is we would stop health tourism tomorrow. It is costing £2 billion. And we would ensure that every migrant, student, foreign worker that came into this country had approved health insurance before they came, because as I said earlier, you should never ever be allowed to take out of the system without putting in first. Ladies and gentlemen, we would also ensure that hospital car parking charges went here in England. It is a tax on the sick, it's cruel, it's unfair, they've done away with it in Scotland, and by saving that £2 billion from health tourism, we would do away with hospital car parking charges here in England. I said earlier that I would talk briefly about the European Union before I finish. I'm an MEP, as is Jim. We're not MPs. And the role is completely different. These guys are elected as MPs. They will realise We don't have any real contact with our constituents. And the reason why we don't is because our constituencies are so large. Mine runs from Crewe to Carlisle, all the way to the Scottish border from Crewe, which is basically on the edge of the Midlands. It takes in the metropolises of Liverpool and Manchester. It takes in Barrow, Wigan, Leigh, Burnley, Bury, Bolton, Oldham. It's too big to get round and have that personal contact. So therefore you can't have surgeries. You can't write a letter and get to know everybody within your constituency. But I suspect that's how the European Union wants it to be. Because it wants everything to be one person removed. So for example, if you remember in the past, we had all those post office closures back in 2008 and 2009. And everyone blamed the government. But of course, the real dark hand in the shadows behind that was the European Union. When people go to fortnightly bin collections, it's the landfill directive. All the time, the European Union is one person removed. It affects almost every aspect of our lives. Indeed, around 70% of the laws in this country begin not in the European Parliament, where there are elected MEPs, but in a building about a mile up the road from the European Parliament called the Parliament Building. And in that building, 28 European commissioners who are unelected meet in secret. And they have 3,000 working groups that advise them on the laws to put down, to make. And who sits on these 3,000 working groups? Well, it's big business, it's the corporates, it's multinationals, it's the pharmaceutical industry, it's the tobacco industry. In fact, there are more lobbyists in Brussels than there are in Washington, DC. And that is because it's a lobbyist's dream, because everything is done behind closed doors. And this legislation that these guys dream up is handed down to the European Parliament for us to vote on. If you think about it, it's a bit like the opposite of the British system. In Britain, the laws are made by the elected in the House of Commons and passed up to an unelected chamber to amend, the House of Lords. In Brussels, it's the other way round. It's the unelected Commission that make the laws that hand it down to the European Parliament to amend. It's un-British and it's fundamentally undemocratic. And that's why we in UKIP believe that we as a country would be freer, more democratic, if we left this organisation all together. And I put it to you, did we really fight 2 world wars in the last century? Did we really send our brave boys up above the skies of South England in the Battle of Britain? Did we really let our boys onto the beaches of Normandy on D-Day for 70% of our laws now to be made in a foreign country by foreign politicians unelected? Shame, ladies and gentlemen, on those politicians of the latter half of the last century and the beginning of this, who have been giving away time and time again something that was never theirs to give. It was British sovereignty, and we in UKIP are committed to taking it back. I said on the radio earlier today, I was getting questioned on LBC about European money. Don't we do well out of the European Union? You see all this European money that people talk about. You see buildings plastered with signs. This project was built with European money. Thank the EU. We couldn't have done it without you. Or we couldn't have done it without EU, was the one I saw the other day. Well, let me just put this myth to bed. There is no such thing as European money. It costs us £55 million every single day to be members of this club. and we send 55 million out to Brussels, and they give half of it back, and they then tell us how we can spend our own money. And if we do spend that money, we then have to show an EU flag on the projects that we've used it on. It is a complete and utter farce. And what happens with the other half? Well, it's building motorways in Romania and Bulgaria. It built an underground system in Warsaw. It built a sewage system in Budapest. Are we mad or what? What we're saying in UKIP is that £55 million a day is your taxation, and it should be spent here in this country, on our schools, on our hospitals, and in ensuring that our boys and girls in the armed forces have the best equipment possible. And another point I had to make, and people were saying, oh, if we left the European Union, the world would collapse in. You know, we're only Little Britain. We're the 6th largest economy on the planet. And there's another organisation out there, an organisation which covers a quarter of the world's land surface, a quarter of the world's peoples, around 20% of global trade. Ladies and gentlemen, it was mentioned before, these are our real friends. It is the Commonwealth, the people we turned our back on in the 1970s. Ladies and gentlemen, we in UKIP are committed to the first thing that we would do once we'd left the European Union. We would reignite our links with our brothers and our sisters in the Commonwealth. David Cameron has promised us a referendum. And some people, I believe, are being fooled. I heard it again today on the radio. You know, if you don't vote Conservative or you go and vote UKIP, you will allow Ed Miliband in. And Mr Cameron is the only man offering a referendum. Well, let me just put this rubbish to bed now. Point one. Mr Cameron has already promised a referendum. He promised us one on the Lisbon Treaty back in 2008, only to renege on that promise once those European elections of 2009 were over. And his argument against it was, well, of course, Gordon Brown has already signed the Lisbon Treaty, and therefore you can't have a retrospective referendum. Well, there's a problem with that argument, isn't there? Because we joined the European Economic Community in 1973, and we had a referendum in 1975. Now, I'm not Carol Vorderman or anything, but I'm telling you that 1975 is after 1973. So put that one to bed now. The other problem that you've got is that he is talking about renegotiation with the European Union, and he has been told by Hollande, by Merkel, by Sarkozy previous to Hollande. He was told also by Donald Tusk, the President of the European Council, Jean-Claude Juncker, the President of the European Commission, that they don't want to renegotiate. Freedom of movement of people isn't even going to be on the table. How can you renegotiate with an organisation that doesn't want to enter into negotiations? It's complete and utter baloney. He's trying to kick the whole thing into the long grass. And what we're saying to Mr Cameron is this: we don't want a referendum in 2017, because by that point we would have handed over another £50 billion to this corrupt organisation that hasn't had its account signed off for 19 years on the bounce. We want a referendum, Mr Cameron, but we want a referendum now. I've noticed I've got about 5 minutes over time already.
You carry on.
I told you that, on. On anything. No, seriously guys, we're doing a great job in this party at the moment. We are changing the British political landscape. And it is something which I don't think has been seen for a generation. Probably people thought the SDP in the early 80s were going to change the political landscape, but they failed. And as a political historian, I have a theory on why they failed and why we won't. And I'll tell you why. Because the SDP were the establishment. They were all former Labour Party cabinet members who formed that party. We're not. We're the opposite. That was a top-down party. We are a bottom-up, anti-establishment party that is really making waves in this country, that has the establishment in the media and in Westminster on the run. They want to keep their cosy cartel together for this century. It isn't going to happen. The days of 2, even 3-party politics is over. The days of multi-party politics has arrived, and the people who are making the running, the people who are going to make the real changes in this country, the people who aren't just going to change British politics, but change society for the better, is you. It's UKIP. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the People's Army, we are on the march, and we will win. Thank you.